Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to the Hearthstone tournament recap. Talking about the top decks, talking about the top players, and the state of the metagame for this week's tournaments. So, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? On to the top players from the North American tournaments. We only have two for this week, as the metagame ones have stopped officially. So, we have the winner of the 23rd Top Deck NA tournament, Cross, and the winner of the 16th Zotac Hearthstone NA Cup, Neglhr. Not even gonna try. But and you'll notice this is going in backwards order. I did 17 last week. It's the Zotac. They put out their decks earlier or later, and I didn't cover the 16th one already, so I'm going backwards. Yeah, I know, sue me. Anyway, moving on to Neglhr. Anyway, he was playing Shaman Rush. Interesting name, interesting deck. That is one-upping me. That definitely is one-upping me. But anyway, so this deck is essentially Rush Hunter the Shaman. Now, it's a very, very interesting concoction. We do have Blood Mage Thalnos and Leroy, which are not unheard of in these kinds of Shaman decks. And Doomhammer, and all the spells are pretty normal, and think, wait a second, this is a normal deck. But no, you got one Wind Fury, and you have the Wind Fury Leroy Jenkins Rock Biter combo, by the way, in this deck, obviously. But besides that, you also have for your charge minions, Argent Commander, Wolf Rider, Bluegill Warrior, and you have other aggro cards like Ironbeak Owl, along with the 2 Earth Shocks just to get past pretty much any taunt. Abusive Sergeant, Argent Squire. There's a lot of really, really interesting cards in here. The Flame Tongue Totems are still obligatory, and they also help out with your charge stuff. Very, very nice utility there. But there's a lot of burst in this deck. Now, keep in mind this is a tournament deck in a Zotac format, so you could sideboard into this, and I imagine it was very, very good against things like Miracle. You just kill them quickly. But it is incredibly interesting to see this kind of thing. Even Cold Light Oracle making this list for the draw power. I would definitely recommend trying this out. I sure am going to be trying this one out over the next week and seeing how it works, because this looks like an amazingly fun deck to put together and play. Kudos on making this one, whatever. Anyway, kudos on the amazing deck. This is definitely a new one. Now, last week we had 2 lists from NA and 1 from EU, and this week's the other way around. Now, for the EU tournaments, we had the 22nd Top Deck tournament, which was won by Empire Draco. Then we had from the Zotac EU Cup, Skip, and from the Gosu Cup, Legendarin. Now, starting with Skip's deck from Zotac. Again, keep in mind, this is a best of 3/best of 5 format where you change decks. It's BlizzCon format, essentially. So this is one of the 3 decks he could have actually played. But this is a very, very interesting concoction of a Token Druid deck. Now, Token Druid is pretty standard deck design in terms of what most people know. Basically, you innervate out 4-drops and 5-drops and make a lot of tokens with Violet Teacher and Power of the Wild and Harvest Golem and things like that, and you just overrun your opponent quickly and do a lot of burst damage with the Savage Roars and things like Force of Nature. And even Power of the Wild with the Violet Teacher. There's a lot of interactions with this deck. It's one of my personal favorite Druid decks to play. And it really is a aggressive spin on the standard Druid decks. Now, the interesting additions to this particular version are 1 Loot Hoarder, no Blood Mage in this deck, and then we have 1 Argent Commander, 1 Big Game Hunter instead of things like Blood Knight or just 2nd Loot Hoarder is usually what fills this slot. And the last additions are Black Knight, which is usually seen in ramp token variants. Now, there are a lot of ramp token variants. There's been a couple ramp token variants have shown up on Trump's stream and things like that, but then there's also the opposite end of the spectrum. So you've got the ramp token list that Trump's been playing, which is basically just ramp with Violet Teacher and Power of the Wild, but then you actually do have token lists with just wild growth in them. It's an interesting spectrum, but this is the purest form of token you can get. But you do have 1 Black Knight, which is interesting in a non-ramp variation of tokens, because it is quite slow, but it does help get past Handlock's threat. This is a much, much better deck against Handlock, I must admit. And then we have a Nixia. I don't remember the last time I saw a Nixia in a competitive list. I think it was about 6 months ago, actually, when the card itself was changed from its original incarnation to what it is now. I can't believe that Onyxia actually made it into a winning list. That is incredible. That is a really, really mean feat. Now, Onyxia summons whelps to fill your board, so, I mean, in theory, if it's the only thing on your board, it's a 14-14 in attack and health on the board, because it's an 8-8 and then it's also 6-1-1s, so it's a lot. It's a big swing, and then you can also Savage Roar for the win guaranteed next turn. So, I mean, it is a very big threat, and it's a win condition, and it is the substitute for Cenarius. I actually like this more than Cenarius, because Cenarius is a bit slow. He does do something when you play him, but Onyxia does a lot when you play her. I mean, you could also see Ragnaros in this place, or, as I said, Cenarius for one of these really, really big threats you can use at the end of the game. But Onyxia is definitely a spicy one. So I will congratulate Skip on that one, bringing a very underutilized legendary to the forefront. Now, on to the winner of the 11th Gosu Cup, Legendarin, who is playing Control Warrior. Now, Control Warrior has been dropping off a little bit more recently, and this particular list is a very standard new AG Control Warrior list, you know, with the Kor'kron Elites as opposed to Frothing Berserkers and Azure Drakes and things like that, and one Cleave. But there are a couple of interesting tech cards in here. Now, we do have the standard 4 win conditions, Alex, Drausa, Baron Geddon, Grommash, Ragnaros, that's all normal. But instead of Cairn, we're running Sylvanas because it's better against things like Ramp, and it's less vulnerable to silence because it's still a 5-5, not a 4-5. Worse against Priest, but better against almost every other class that can be running silences, things like Druid, for example. Then we do have the normal Enrage engine of the Acolyte of Pains, Armor Smiths, Cruel Taskmasters, with, as I said, the new AG part of it, which is the Azure Drakes, Kor'kron Elites, and the Cleave, as opposed to things like Frothing Berserker and more controlling spells, which is what they used to play. We do, however, have the one Brawl in here. Now, this is mostly to counter Stealthed Auctioneers and also Shamans. There's been a lot more Shamans and Handlocks around recently, so Brawl has become a very, very powerful card. In those kinds of matchups, getting a Brawl on 2 Molten Giants that are taunted is game-changing, and it is a very, very powerful card in a lot of different matchups at the moment. The rest of the deck is more or less standard. We do still have the one Gorehowl, 2 Fiery War Axe, but I actually do think Control Warrior is dropping off a little bit at the moment. It's not really a top tier deck anymore, but if you do run the Brawl, if you do play it correctly and you run a couple of tech cards like Sylvanas, I do think the deck can still win tournaments, as is evident. I do think the deck is still very, very good, and people are going to keep playing it, so you should keep testing against it. Anyway, as for the metagame in general at the moment, Miracle is destroying things on ladder, which is why in tournaments, weirdly enough, people have been not really running Miracle, but running counters to Miracle. We're in a very weird part of the metagame right now, where on ladder Miracle dominates, but in tournaments Miracle is more or less useless because everyone has Handlock or Rush Hunter or just some Miracle counter in their arsenal of decks they can switch to, and it's just not as good as it would be if those decks weren't as popular in tournaments. So I would say running Miracle in tournaments is not a good idea, but running Miracle on ladder is very, very easy, especially with the ladder season reset. Definitely very, very good for ranking up, just not so much a good tournament deck. I would say one of the better tournament decks at the moment to watch out for is Handlock. A lot of people are leading with Handlock, which has led to the popularity rise in Shaman. So I would say that a good tournament deck at the moment is probably either Shaman. It's either Shaman, Handlock, or I would say Tokens with Black Knight and BGH. Like, you need those two to deal with Handlocks, but Tokens in general is a pretty good list from Druid, and I would say it's one of the better tournament lists at the moment, although you can still run things like Shaman, Handlock, and even Warrior. So, the metagame at the moment is a little odd. I wouldn't say it's the best metagame we've had. It's a bit stale and a little strange, but it's still got some weird things going on with it, like with Miracle. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, just ask me any questions, put it in the comment section below. If you have any tournaments you want me to cover and actually have sort of ways of getting hold of the deck lists for them, again, put it in the comments, because getting hold of these is not that easy. You have to go on different websites. That's why I don't use ESL, because ESL, while it's a big tournament, quite difficult to actually get the deck lists from, because that website is very difficult to navigate. But anyway, thank you all for watching. So it's been Jotto, signing off.